Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. This is ScottReisch. The district attorney in the Patrick Frazee matter is putting all of their faith in Krystal Lee Kenney. She's lied to just about everyone. Why should we believe her now? Let's talk about it. Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. This is Scott Reisch of Crime Talk. Today, I would like to follow up on a video that we made the other day, just after Patrick Frazee's preliminary hearing, which was held in Teller County, Colorado. And for those who do not know, the Patrick Frazee case is somewhat of a interesting matter because it's really turning into kind of a whodunit. So Patrick Frazee, it is alleged that he committed the murder of the mother of his child, a woman by the name of Kelsey Berreth. And in this little triangle, there is now an Idaho nurse who now claims that she was intimately involved in this situation, and Krystal Lee Kenney is her name. And so what we are, doing here is talking about what came out at the preliminary hearing. So, Mr. Frazee, it is alleged that he went to the residence of Miss Berreth and killed her, basically on November 22nd. And then on November 24th, Miss Kenney drives from Idaho to clean up the mess, so to speak. And then they ultimately burn the body of Miss Berreth on a ranch that Mr. Frazee's family owns or somehow has access to as well. But there is a lot of information that came out in the affidavit for arrest warrant that was recently released, as well as the testimony at the preliminary hearing. Now, as you may recall from previous videos that we've done at the preliminary hearing, and just as I had predicted, the district attorney was not going to call Ms. Kenney to the stand. The burden is such that the district attorney gets a break. They get to have the court view the evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution, drawing all inferences in their favor. So basically what that means is that the court is legally bound to basically take all of their evidence as true. And they have to take that into consideration whether they dismiss a case or not. And rarely are cases ever dismissed at a preliminary hearing. So at the preliminary hearing, the only people that were called were detectives, law enforcement people who had been involved in the case, prepared the affidavit, and were involved in the overall investigation. Usually it's the lead detective. He gets up there and regurgitates the affidavit for arrest warrant, and the case is bound over. Very low standard of proof, simply that of probable cause. Would a reasonable person to believe that a crime was committed and that Mr. Frazee had committed it? And so when you get the benefit that the court has to view the allegations as basically true and any evidence presented as true, it's not going away, okay? So that's where that stands. Now, the people did amend their complaint and information, and that's why Mr. Frazee is entitled to a complaint and information, that is why Mr. Frazee is entitled to a preliminary hearing, is because the people chose to proceed by a complaint and information. If the people had decided to proceed via indictment, then Mr. Frazee would not be entitled to a preliminary hearing because the grand jurors in that particular case would have found probable cause. However, he would have been able to have a judge review the indictment and the grand jury transcripts for probable cause to make sure that there in fact was probable cause. But you don't get a chance to cross-examine anyone. So Mr. Frazee still is charged with murder in the first degree. It's a Class 1 felony, carries life without parole. He's now charged in count 2, solicitation to commit murder in the first degree. That is an F2 felony here in Colorado, which carries 16 to 48 years the way it's charged, because the people have added what they call sentencing enhancers, because it's a crime of violence and a deadly weapon, to wit a baseball bat, was allegedly used. Count 3 is murder in the first degree, and that is basically felony murder. Basically, that the murder was committed at the residence of Miss Berreth, and that in the commission of that murder, a robbery was taking place, and somebody died in the commission of that robbery, to it basically a cell phone or any other property that was taken from Miss Berreth's residence. And count 4, 5, and 4 and 5 are additional counts of solicitation to commit murder, as Miss Kenney says that she was asked by Mr. Frazee to commit the murder of Miss Berreth on multiple occasions, even though she did not do it. And that's what I want to get to talking about here in just a second. And then we have tampering with a deceased human body, which is a Class 3 felony, which carries 4 to 12 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections, although that is the least of Mr. Frazee's troubles as it relates to the Miss Berreth's matter that he has pending before the court. So let's talk about the preliminary hearing, okay? And as we learned a couple of weeks ago, Miss Kenney is a nurse from Idaho, and that Miss Kenney was apparently romantically involved with Mr. Frazee back in college. And although Miss Kenney was married at the time, it appears as though that she was having an intimate relationship with Mr. Frazee. Now, obviously, Mr. Frazee was also in a relationship with Miss Berreth because they have a child together. Now, what seems a little odd to me is, and I don't know, why do people go and kill their partners? I have no idea. But nobody has explained or articulated why the great urgency of Mr. Frazee to have Miss Berreth killed. I haven't seen anything that's been convincing, like, oh yeah, that seems reasonable. He's going to kill her, or because of this, he was so upset, so enraged. Why would he do this? It just strikes me as odd. Now, usually in weird lover triangles, it's usually the really jealous one that is the one that gets overly zealous and goes and harms somebody in a particular way. So Mr. Frazee's not married to Ms. Berreth. They have a child together. Apparently things are going okay. They're, going along. Maybe there's some custody issues, but it seems like things are okay. Amicable exchanges, no history of domestic violence, anything along those lines, at least that we know about. And then we have the girlfriend that comes into place who gets divorced, and one would, I think, reasonably could say that she left her husband because she wanted to be with Mr. Frazee. And if you think about it, if she wants to be with Mr. Frazee, what's the one thing that she wants out of her way? I guess any competition, so to speak? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. No one's articulated why Mr. Frazee would want Miss Berreth dead. And so we have Miss Kenney, who lies to the police. Now, she just doesn't lie once. She just doesn't lie twice. She lies repeatedly to the officers. So as the investigation in this case begins, and for background for some people that aren't that familiar with it, is that Miss Berreth and Mr. Frazee have a 1-year-old daughter. And on November 22nd, they are going to do an exchange of their child for the Thanksgiving holiday. And Miss Berreth is seen at a Safeway that day. And then later in that same day, Mr. Frazee is seen at a Walmart store with the child. Okay, so I've tried to etch out kind of a little timeline here. And so November 22nd, all right, 12:27 p.m., Berreth's at the store. Now at 12:54, through 117, Frazee is seen at the Walmart store. And then we have at 124, it looks as though somebody fitting the physical description of Frazee, but it's unclear, goes back to the Berreth's apartment. And, no one has identified exactly that was him. We haven't seen any video of this, but apparently the police have reason to believe that this is probably Mr. Frazee. And then apparently they see him going back at 3:36 p.m. on that same date. And when Mr. Frazee first talks to the police, he says, hey, we exchanged the child, and we exchanged the child in the alley behind the house, and everything's fine, no big deal. But he doesn't say that he goes back to her residence, and it's unclear if, in fact, that was actually Mr. Frazee that was there. And so it gets a little weird because Miss Berreth is basically missing, and nobody reports her missing until her mother does roughly 10 days later on December 6th. And the police originally go to her apartment, don't find anything particularly out of place, anything weird or suspicious. But ultimately, as the case goes on, there are pings on Miss Berreth's phone that say that she is somewhere near Idaho. And through a series of events, it gets somewhat interesting. And when I first started talking about this case, I said this case is going to come down to cell phones. It's going to come down to cell phone towers. It's going to come down to internet searches, any kind of communications, text messages, things of that nature. And what it turns out is, as we go along in this particular case, is there's lots of communications between Frazee and Berreth. They both get rid of their phones right about December 4th. At a certain point, both Berreth and Frazee's cell phones are basically together. Now, does that mean that somebody's deceased, or does that mean they're simply in the car behind him? Are they meeting? Who knows, right? Obviously, the police believe that the cell phones were together because she was dead, and that's when this scheme started to basically to throw off the police and investigators as it relates to where was Miss Berreth, because she had just basically picked up and left. And so when Mr. Frazee's first contacted by the police, he says, hey, you know what? I don't think I'm going to talk to you. Let me talk to my attorney. And what I find is interesting is that his brother is in law enforcement and basically advised him, you should probably get yourself an attorney. And I've said that all along. Anybody who ever says that, oh, why aren't they talking to the police? It must be they're guilty. If I've represented police officers over the years. I've represented family of police officers over the years. And the first thing that they do is they lawyer up, because they know anything they say can be used against you and can be taken out of context, misconstrued, misinterpreted in any way. So Mr. Frazee just says, not going to talk with you. The police go through this, and they continue their investigation. They get cell phone records. They actually get the search warrant for his cell phone, Mr. Frazee's cell phone. They get records relating to cell phone towers that was available to them as it relates to Berreth and Miss Kenney as well. And ultimately, through a series of events, the FBI, working with the local officers here, goes out and interviews Miss Kenney. And what Miss Kenney first says when she's asked whether she knows Mr. Frazee is that she originally denies it. And, I just can't remember the last time I spoke with him. Maybe it was in the last month and a half. I would have to check my phone to see when that was. So she's already off to not producing a very good lie, so to speak. And it gets even better from there, because the cell phones are obviously near her house, Berreth's house as well, and her story starts to crumble. So she ultimately talks to the police, and says, I may have gone to Colorado and I may kind of know Mr. Frazee. I was going to buy a horse from him, but, it's all good. Nothing to worry about. And the agents almost immediately know that she's not being truthful because they have her cell phone data. And as it turns out, Miss Kenney, had borrowed a friend's car, driven to Colorado, and she, according to her, she just cleaned up the murder scene at the Berreth apartment. Now, what's interesting is that Miss Kenney says that Mr. Frazee had asked her on multiple occasions to kill Miss Berreth. The first time, she was basically going to poison her with putting something in her coffee, putting something in Miss Berreth's coffee. The next incident was that she was going to go basically hit her with a pole. And then in the third incident, she was going to go and use a baseball bat, but she basically chickened out every time, in which this is what ultimately led Mr. Frazee to have to go do it himself, and coincidentally with a baseball bat. And so that's where she stands as far as talking to the police, kind of, as the day and the weeks progress. And she denies that she had anything to do with the cell phones or sending any text messages, which ultimately turns out to, once again, be not truthful. Okay? So in the meantime, back at the Berreth residence, Miss Berreth's family is staying at the property, and they find what they believe to be blood in the bathroom, and there is some blood throughout the house and things of that nature, which they ultimately come back in and say, the agents believe that this is in fact blood. Now, and it came out, and not to be, too graphic, but it's apparently Miss Berreth was on her period, so to find blood near the toilet is not that particularly shocking to me. There's also some found on the ceiling, but that could probably be explained. And when the DNA profiles are developed of DNA that's found in the bathroom, and this really didn't come out, but they found a DNA profile that matched that of Miss Berreth, and then one unknown male profile, and then one unknown female profile were developed in the bathroom. And they also compared what they had with Mr. Frazee, and it was not a match. So who knows? Did Miss Berreth have friends that stayed over at the residence? Was this somebody there that, was the killer? Who knows? But they have this DNA that's there that doesn't match Mr. Frazee. And even if Mr. Frazee's DNA was there, so what? He's there to pick up his child back and forth. It wouldn't be particularly shocking if that was in fact there. But apparently this unknown female, who knows, it could still be Miss Kenney, but that hasn't been produced yet, at least to the public. So we will see. Now, as we go on in the investigation, like I said, the first interview, Miss Krystal Lee Kenney denies knowing Mr. Frazee, vaguely remembers him, when it turns out that they were boyfriend, girlfriend in college, even though they, went their separate ways. Miss Kenney ultimately says that that Frazee was her first and only love. And so that's where things get a little interesting, because the government, the FBI agents, go and interview Miss Lee Kenney's ex-husband, Mr. Chad Lee, and he says, hey, you know what? I didn't really know where her whereabouts were on November 24th and 25th. Was originally told that she was going to a friend's house in Idaho. So not only she lied to police, she's lying to her ex-husband, who apparently they reside together even though they're divorced, but they have children. So, things happen these days. And Chad, her ex-husband, states that she seemed very nervous after the call from the agents in this particular case. And she said, quote, she thought someone, quote, set her up, end quote. Now, Mr. Chadley was also aware that there was an affair going on back in 2016, 2017, but he didn't want to know the specifics of it. But ultimately, it led to their divorce, and that on December 4th, Miss Krystal Lee Kenney had stated that she couldn't find her cell phone and that he had taken her to town to get a new one. Coincidentally, that was the same time that kind of everything was really heating up, and there were a lot of cell phones going on back and forth between Mr. Frazee and Miss Kenney, and he also was changing cell phones. So things get interesting from there as well. But this is what I thought was interesting, and because the people are relying upon Miss Kenney's testimony here, and they're gone with the story that Miss Berreth was killed via a baseball bat via Mr. Frazee. No baseball bat has been recovered. Obviously, we talked about there's no body. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Miss Krystal Lee Kenney also, it's just weird. Okay, there's a couple of things that don't make sense to me. So Miss Krystal Lee Kenney also borrows the vehicle of a Megan Garrison, and she drives her Volkswagen Passat to Colorado and back and forth. And when the FBI interview Miss Garrison, she says, you know what, after I kind of talked with people and did some investigation, she said that she decided to check the status of her weapon that she keeps in her vehicle. And she keeps 8 rounds in the magazine and nothing in the chambers. And upon return to her vehicle, the weapon had 1 round in the chamber and 6 rounds in the magazine. Megan never loads a round into the chamber, and Megan felt it was suspicious the gun was in a different condition. Now, everyone keeps talking about that there was some sort of baseball bat that was used. Now here, a weapon that Miss Kenney had access to, and the owner saying, I always keep 8 rounds in there, and guess what? There were only 2, or there was 2 used, and there were 6 in there with one in the chamber. Since no body's been recovered, there's nothing to indicate that possibly this was not used in the homicide of Miss Berreth, because frankly, most people don't go around swinging baseball bats at people. It's just gruesome. It's hard to do. People are just, it's not what normal people do, so to speak. If you're going to kill somebody, you're going to do it quickly, and you're going to do it, methodically and quickly. And, if people's cell phones are together, who knows? They're driving out someplace and somebody shoots somebody, who knows? There's just so many unknowns in this particular case, and I think it's really going to come out to be a whodunit, so to speak. And so the prosecution has completely latched onto Kenney's story, and they're looking for anything that they can do to corroborate it. So Miss Kenney ultimately comes clean. She gets herself an attorney, and my hat's off to her attorney, because clearly it could easily be charged that she was in a conspiracy, if not the murderer. And she got her in immediately, took a plea to tampering, which is an F6, carries 12 to 18 months in the Department of Corrections, maybe 3 years if there's aggravating circumstances, and she has to agree to testify against Mr. Frazee. So they put all their money on that particular horse, and they're going to ride that horse all the way, and whatever she says, they're going to try to back it up from the beginning. And so the police and the prosecution knew about the many, many lies that she had told to them. It also, is interesting how much detail that she provides. Now, we haven't seen if there's actual text messages. So what Miss Kenney says that Mr. Frazee told her, for example, oh, it's really hard killing somebody and then going to eat Thanksgiving dinner, or go do this. If it's not in a text message, we have no way to really corroborate it. It's just we got to take her word for it. And we haven't been provided all those text messages, if any exist. We haven't been able to see them. So we don't know. Is it just her talking on the phone with him? Who knows? They're in love. They're infatuated. They're going to talk all the time. So who knows? But it just makes, like I said, it really doesn't make any sense. Why kill her? There's nothing to indicate that there was any bad blood between anybody, that there was going to be anything that was going on that, like, we have to kill her now or our evil plot is going to, go away. I mean, if they want to be together, fine. It looks like Miss Berreth was doing just fine on her own. And so Miss Kenney ultimately comes clean. Like I said, that she was called on the 24th to come and clean up this house, the residence. And so, being the good, dutiful girlfriend that she was, Miss Kenney gets in her car, drives out to Colorado, apparently, gets a little white cleanup suit, a bunch of Clorox, borrows some cleaning items from Mr. Frazee's house, apparently, or so she represents, and she cleans the house, and there's blood all over. And she states that she was scared of Mr. Frazee, that something was going to happen to her. Now, that just seems a little hard to believe. You get the call from your boyfriend who says, hey, I just killed the mother of my 1-year-old child. Come clean this mess up, and you're supposedly afraid. If you're so afraid, why didn't you pick up the phone, drive straight to the police department there in Idaho so that you can contact authorities and say, I'm aware of a homicide that's just taking place? No. What do? You supposedly now get in the car, drive for 8 hours, come to the house, clean up, talk with Mr. Frazee, drive back, dispose of the phone, do text messages to throw off the scene, and dispose of her purse, and supposedly watch the body burn in a black tote in a big bonfire that was created at the property. But I was too afraid to do that until you police officers showed up. Thank goodness. What DA is going to believe that? I mean, are most citizens going to believe that? I find that very hard to believe. But that's why we have jury trials, so that the jury can decide the credibility of this particular case. Now, Miss Kenney also says that she never saw the body, but that the body was taken out in the tote. Well, I'm curious to see, or want to know why, if there's video footage of supposedly Mr. Frazee going into the apartment on the 22nd. Is there any video footage of him bringing in a tote? Is there any footage of him leaving, carrying out a tote? Where is the video footage possibly of Miss Kenney going in to clean the apartment? Any neighbors see her show up? Anyone see Mr. Frazee show up? As it relates to the burning of the body, where is it? They see some charred things, some charred items out there, but they find some plastic that's been charred. But, are they going to be able to say that's the tote that she was in? It would take, why do they have a huge furnace that would basically burn the body like, some sort of crematorium? It just seems very hard to me to believe that there would be no remnants whatsoever of human remains in a bonfire like that out on a piece of property. And Miss Frazee said she never saw the body in any way. Like trying to minimize, I guess. I drive all this way to clean up the mess, but I don't want to see the body, or I never saw it, or never looked at it. I never helped raise this toad up in any way. There's just so many questions in her story. It just doesn't make sense. But she says that, she disposed of her purse and her cell phone, and, that all these items were burned with the exception of her cell phone in this big bonfire. And at one point she says that she also threw away some keys and things of that nature in a big gorge near their house. Well, let's go out and find it. Let's go take a look. Where is it? There's just, too many items here that just don't make sense. And so the court found that there was probable cause to all 8 counts. Not surprising, given the legal standard. Didn't expect anything else. The court also found that there was proof evident, presumption great, and that therefore Mr. Frazee should not receive a bond. Once again, not particularly shocking. I've had cases where you go and proof evident, presumption great. That judge is going to find it. I've had other cases where it's been questionable and a bond is posted. I've had them as low as $75,000 on a case which was clearly self-defense and was ultimately dismissed. I've had other cases where client didn't do anything, so to speak, that would warrant a first-degree murder, and the judge said, your evidence isn't so clear and so great, overwhelming, so to speak, that you need to you get a bond. But sometimes they post a bond so high it doesn't really matter. $200,000 might as well be $2 million to most people. But I've won cases where the court has found proof, evidence, presumption great, and the client sits in custody the entire time, and the client walks out at the end of the day. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen, or they're going to be found guilty just because they find proof, evidence, presumption great. And in this particular case, we have a situation where the defense can point the finger and say, Mr. Frazee did nothing, and that the person who killed Miss Berreth was Miss Lee Kenney, Krystal Lee Kenney, that she's the one that actually killed Miss Berreth. She was going to do it 3 times. On the 3rd time, she had a baseball bat, but she chickened out. Can't find any of these other items, at least that they can say. So clearly she was thinking about it. She was going to do it. She was going to go do it. The question is, did Frazee put her up to it or ask her, or is she just making this up to protect herself? Based upon all of her previous statements where she denied even knowing Mr. Frazee, I think people are going to look at her and say, wow, why should I believe you now? And really, the question is going to become, is this a whodunit? And did Miss Krystal Lee Kenney get away with murder? That is going to be the defense. And at most, maybe the Frazee defense points the finger at Miss Kenney and says at most, okay, maybe we freaked out, we panicked, and we did dispose of a body or something along those lines. Or maybe she's not even dead at all. Who knows? But the Miss Kenney had, if she is dead, Miss Kenney had something to do with it, and not me, because I love the mother of my child. Why would I want to kill her? There's nothing to say that we had a bad relationship. They said they fought. Maybe there was some, Miss Berreth was maybe a little upset because, and a little depressed because of her relationship ending. Reasonable things there, but nothing that usually drives somebody to murder. But what usually does drive people to murder? Jealousy. Jealousy in love triangles. Who would be the jealous one? Who wouldn't want to make sure that the, quote, competition isn't around anymore to compete, so to speak? Well, yep, you said it. You're thinking it, right? Kenney would want to make Berreth go away. And so I think the defense has a real opportunity here to really put on a very good defense of Mr. Frazee. Is it going to work? We won't know. We have a long time to see. We're not even in arraignment yet. And so I would guess over the next 6 months to a year, we're going to see some things really get interesting. I think we're going to find out that perhaps Miss Kenney may have gotten away with murder based upon her plea. Normally, sometimes DAs will have you plead guilty, or they'll wait until you actually testify to do that. And she got a gift of a lifetime. I can tell you, I don't know what the DA was thinking in this particular case, but in most jurisdictions, if you had that much involvement in a case, you're not getting an F6, okay? You're going to prison. Maybe you plead guilty to second-degree murder. You plead guilty to accessory, but you're not going to get a free pass. This is basically the equivalent of immunity. And so why did they rush to it? And I think the defense is going to be able to show you rushed to this judgment. You picked the winners and losers here instead of really investigating. And now they're going to do everything they can to try and corroborate. You can see it in the affidavit. They say that this corroborates Miss Kenney's story. Repeatedly, I think there's probably 4 or 5 times in the affidavit where they say that. So it's going to be interesting. I appreciate you watching. Thank you very much. It's been a very long week, but I wanted to get some commentary out on this particular case, and I will resume a schedule, even though in the next week I am preparing for a multiple-week homicide case. So it's going to be busy, but we're going to keep the content coming because I appreciate everything that you all do as far as watching, or even we've actually sold, I must say, quite a few of these official Crime Talk mugs. So those of you who have bought them, I say thank you. I can also say we haven't quit our day job just yet due to coffee mug sales, but it is appreciated, those who have actually bought it. And there's a link down below in the informational section where you can go to buy those if anyone would like to do that. So appreciate you watching. If you like the channel, please like the video. Please subscribe and hit that little bell if you want to get notifications of when we put out new content. Please hit the bell if you'd like to be notified of new content. Thank you for watching Crime Talk. This is Scott Reisch. Have a great day.